Sunrise settles over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as the range wakes in small sounds. Flags stir. Gravel crunches under distant boots. And the salt air smells clean. Emily Carter moves early with a checklist mind and quiet hands. She is a civilian range maintenance technician, focused and steady in the pale light. She sweeps fired brass into a canvas bucket and keeps the lanes clear. She patches paper targets, checks splintered frames, and logs equipment without issuing ammunition. A platoon of SEALs jogs past on the service road, breathing hard and trading easy jabs. Their cadence rolls by her like surf, and eyes slide past as if she were part of the fence line. She pauses only to flip open a battered field notebook that rides in her vest pocket. Her grandfather, Master Sergeant Robert Carter of Army Special Forces in Vietnam, filled it with wind calls, elevation notes, and hand-drawn range sketches. Emily studies the pages in silence until muscle memory answers. Numbers sit like landmarks and turn distance into something familiar. She reads the range flags without thinking and watches the heat shimmer above the berm. Air pushes from right to left. A slow crosswind that her mind translates into simple holds. Around her, cadre check lanes. Medgear sits staged. And range control speaks in calm voices. The morning feels deliberate and safe, like a rulebook turning its own pages. She moves again, efficient and unnoticed, leaving only clean targets and swept gravel. Habit covers the truth that skill lives under the surface. Inside, a promise takes shape and settles deeper than pride. Only competence counts. And something is coming that will ask for proof. The morning on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado settles into its steady beat as the range opens its eyes. Emily Carter moves with practiced calm. A civilian maintenance technician who knows the lanes like a map she drew herself. She patches paper targets with clean sheets and leans into each staple until it bites wood. She checks splintered frames for wobble, tightens what can be saved, and tags what needs replacement. Buckets fill with spent brass as her broom pushes a neat tide along the concrete. She logs equipment counts on a clipboard, keeping inventory straight without issuing ammunition or touching any weapon. Passing SEALs drift by in small knots on their way to training briefs. Their steps drum past her work area while her attention stays on the small tasks that make a hot range function safely. Her eyes keep a second ledger that lives in wind and light. She reads range flags as they lift and fall, and watches a thin mirage shimmer above the berm where the soil breathes. Coastal air moves with a salt weight that she can feel in her cheek and on her forearms. She files the cross push as a gentle hold in mills, the way some people note the time of day. Montana lives in the quiet corners of her memory. In open fields with her grandfather, Master Sergeant Robert Carter of Army Special Forces in Vietnam. She learned prone stability, natural point of aim, trigger press, and follow through that does not hurry. He taught her to call wind in mills and translate to minute of angle without a calculator. The lesson always ended in patience, where a long breath could erase a bad idea. On weekends, she signs into civilian long-range matches under a different name. She gathers dope across dry desert ridges and the slow wet air of the coast until the notebook feels heavy with corrections and sketches. That battered book rides in her vest pocket even when she is only repairing frames. The pages hold wind calls, elevation tables, and quick drawings of ranges she has studied from a dozen angles. Chain of command stays outside her lane unless a safety issue needs a voice. She keeps her role tight and clean, far from any unauthorized handling of weapons. The rhythm never asks for praise. It asks for quiet efficiency and the discipline to do unglamorous work well. By mid-morning, the pattern is set. Routine becomes a kind of cover that keeps eyes moving past what matters. She lets it be. The math behind a perfect shot is still hers. even when the task is only a staple and a sweep. Morning settles into procedure on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as a SEAL platoon stages for live-fire military operations in urban terrain lanes. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, an O3 platoon leader, sets the sequence and confirms who owns each task. Petty Officer First Class Jake Walker stands as the designated marksman with an Mk-11, mod 0 inches 7.62 by 51 mm NATO. His magazines are staged. The bipod is locked, and the optic has already been confirmed. Special Warfare Operator Second Class Ethan Morales runs communications with an AN or PRC 152 handheld radio. He performs checks and keeps net discipline steady so control calls do not step on each other. Range safety shapes the tone before the first round is ever fired. Lane control marks boundaries with flags and cones, while a medevac plan sits on standby with routes briefed and gear staged. Zero confirm is verified by cadre, who walk target arrays and mark impacts. The firing line remains a cold range until every checklist item clears, then transitions to a hot range in a measured cadence. Emily Carter works at the 800-meter line where distance makes details small. She replaces paper targets, inspects target frames, and tags weak lumber for swap without issuing ammunition or handling weapons. Her movements keep the lane efficient while staying inside the limits of a civilian maintenance role. Clipboard notes track frame counts and hardware needs so the evolution will not pause for missing parts. Control traffic flows in short bursts across the training area. Safety officers pace with deliberate eyes while the platoon rehearses entries and spacing without any dramatic motion. The sounds of a professional morning settle into a steady rhythm. Brass buckets wait. Wind taps the range flags, and the concrete carries footsteps in a calm pattern. Everything feels authentic to a United States Navy Special Operations training environment. Tasks are owned, accountability is clear, and the gap between rehearsal and execution narrows without hurry. Emily finishes the far targets and steps back from the berm. The range breathes in a quiet pause that holds the space before the next phase begins. The controlled rhythm fractures with a deep thump that lifts dust from concrete. An administrative structure near the perimeter takes the first indirect hit, and the concussion rolls across the lanes like a heavy wave. Sand and grit hang in the air while echoes stack against the berms. From the outer hills beyond the training complex, sudden small arms fire rakes laterally across open ground. Plausibility lives in the preparation that no one saw. A small terror cell stages just outside secure fencing, flies a commercial quadcopter as a spotter, and times the strike to blend with routine traffic and morning movement. Base security snaps to lockdown and clamps internal routes. Movement control creates choke points that slow the quick reaction force to roughly 8 minutes. A lifetime under fire, but realistic for a large installation. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks manages the platoon with tight sector control and short calls. He turns training spacing into real cover and forces accountability checks, even as the dust drifts. Petty Officer First Class Jake Walker, the designated marksman, takes a round through the shoulder and stays conscious. His kit rests where he fell, and pain competes with the need to keep the lane coherent. Special Warfare Operator Second Class Ethan Morales keeps the net steady through an AN or PRC 152 handheld radio. Shrapnel bites into his legs, yet his cadence holds the channel clear for essential traffic. The platoon is pinned by enfilade angles rather than chaos. Rounds walk across barriers from oblique lines, and every partial exposure becomes a risk, measured in inches. Range safety hardware becomes real cover in a breath. Barricades, walls, and berms that taught lessons a minute ago now keep people alive with their weight and height. At the 800-meter line, Emily Carter drops prone behind a berm and goes still. She reads muzzle flashes and terrain, tracks the drone's path with her eyes, and avoids any unauthorized handling of weapons. Radio brevity cuts the air like metronome clicks. Timeline pressure tightens as 8 minutes stretches and contracts with each burst. And the soundscape shifts from training chatter to measured survival work. A second impact slams the far edge of the complex and leaves the air vibrating. The morning's practice cadence vanishes, and only the work of staying alive remains. Training stops breathing after the second impact, and the range turns into work that keeps people alive. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks holds the SEAL platoon together, while casualties are stabilized and fields of fire lock into clean sectors. Emily Carter lies prone behind the 800-meter berm and lets stillness do the first sort. Her eyes move without hurry and begin to turn noise into a map. She matches muzzle flashes to a mental clock face and then to true bearings in her head. The east ridge marks near 2 o'clock, while a second position settles out to the west. Distance unfolds by habit and not by guess. Primary shooters sit close to 600 meters, and a machine gun position pushes deeper to about 750 meters. A pair of movers below the crest behaves like a spotter team. Their pattern fits indirect coordination, and their spacing reads like people who think they are unseen. Wind gets read 3 ways because none of them lie the same way twice. Flags give direction. Mirage shimmer above the berm shows gradient. And coastal brush flicks in a rhythm that confirms the cross push. She turns that picture into mill holds, the way some people note the hour. For a 7.62 by 51 millimeter trajectory from an Mk11 Mod 0, elevation and a modest left hold sketch themselves cleanly. Her hands stay off any weapon until procedure catches up. She low crawls under covering angles to a storage shed and secures the designated marksman's spare rifle case, a spotting scope, and a headset. She brings the locked case to Lieutenant Brooks and sets it within reach without breaking safety lines. Authorization belongs to command, and she keeps it that way. Competence still needs proof, so she gives data before she asks for trust. Bearings, estimated ranges, elevation in mills, and wind holds move from her memory to his plan without wasted words. The range has shifted from cold to hot, but roles remain clear on a United States base. Magazine control, lane ownership, and the line between safety and combat stay bright even when dust hangs in the air. Under direction. She stages at a covered firing point with a parapet and a clean backstop. The spotting scope sits to her left where she can self-spot and still stay low. She checks gear and sequence like it matters because it does. Bipod set. Rear support improvised. Eye relief settled. And parallax cleared. Elevation dials to her dope for 600 meters, and wind holds park in mills for a steady cross. Selector stays on safe. Chamber empty, and the bolt ready to be managed when cleared. Her breathing finds a slow cadence as the ridge settles into glass. The math has turned the chaos into a clear picture, and she waits for the decision that will come next. The range holds a hard quiet after the mapping is done. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks weighs risk, authority, and time, while the platoon keeps sectors tight and med checks steady. Rules of engagement, weapons accountability, and liability live on one side of the scale. Survival and duty live on the other. And the clock keeps moving. He requests full data before any trigger is pressed. Emily Carter gives 600 meters with elevation in mills. Wind hold in mills for a right to left push. Density altitude estimated from morning air. An expected impact at center chest. The lane is hot, but procedure still leads. A confirm on steel comes first to verify competence without engaging living targets. Smoke blooms to cut lines of sight and reduce exposure. Suppressive angles snap on command while cadre mark an IPSC steel plate at 100 meters inside a safe backstop. Petty Officer, First Class Jake Walker uses his uninjured hand to pass the spotting scope. Special Warfare Operator Second Class Ethan Morales keeps net discipline and passes an AN or PRC 152 headset to Emily so control remains clean. Handling stays exact from first touch. Safety on. Magazine seated with a firm tug. Chamber check. And a steady prone behind cover that supports a calm, natural respiratory pause. The press is clean and the follow-through holds the sight stable. Steel answers with a flat ring that carries through the smoke and dust. Safe on and bolt back the moment the hit is confirmed. The test shot ends with a clear distinction between training steel and engagement on human threats. Data, not bravado, drives the next step. The confirm validates dope, wind call, and control under stress. Lieutenant Brooks makes the decision that the situation requires. Emily is tasked as Overwatch under his authority, with responsibilities defined and bounded by the emergency. The platoon shifts fire to mask movement and refreshes smoke where gaps appear. Angles adjust so her route to a protected position is covered without crossing friendly lanes. She moves low and deliberate to the chosen rooftop with a parapet and clean field of fire. The spotting scope rides accessible, and muzzle discipline stays strict. At position, she builds the shot the same way every time. Bipod locked. Rear support set. Eye relief checked. Parallax cleared. And a quick scan for mirage and flag behavior. Elevation dials to her dope for 600 meters. Wind hold sets in mils for the current cross. And her breathing finds an even cadence. The lane feels controlled again. Not safe, but orderly. A lawful and necessary choice has aligned the platoon. And Emily waits for the first clearance with calm eyes on glass. Smoke blooms along the lane as the platoon settles into a disciplined rhythm. Under Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, suppressive fire stretches across target reference points to blind angles and by seconds. Emily Carter moves on command from the 800-meter berm toward a training building with a protective parapet. Her authorization as Overwatch is clear and logged within the emergency. She runs low between hard cover with short bounds that keep exposure brief. Each stop includes a kneel check and a quick scan that confirms sectors and next cover. Radio traffic stays clipped with shift fire and TRP calls that redirect guns to mask her path. Timing feels like a metronome that keeps danger inside narrow beats. The MK11 Mod 0 rides close with muzzle discipline that never slips. Selector sits on safe. Finger stays straight. And magazine retention remains firm, even when the pace tightens. A spotting scope is slung for quick use without snagging on rail edges. An AN, or PRC, 152 headset feeds net awareness so she can align movements with shifting sectors. Stairwell shadows lead to a rooftop that holds a clean field of view and hard cover. The parapet gives height without silhouette and turns the roofline into a protected hide. She slides prone behind the parapet and begins a careful setup. Bipod locks. Rear support is improvised. And natural point of aim settles the rifle without muscle strain. Eye relief and parallax are checked until the scope feels like a clear window. Elevation dials to dope for 600 meters and a crosswind hold in Mills Parks in her mind. She runs a clean chamber check and gives the magazine a firm seat. The line between test and engagement stays bright, even as the lane remains hot. Down below, sectors shift again to reassign coverage once she is set. Suppressive arcs go from mask to guard, framing the rooftop while keeping lanes deconflicted. She positions the spotting scope for self-spotting without lifting her profile. Mirage, flags, and brush confirm the wind picture she built on the ground. Breathing slows until the reticle sits still on glass. Calm readiness gathers in quiet layers as she prepares to call and take the first real shot once cleared. Emily settles prone behind the rooftop parapet at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The MK11 Mod 0 riding steady in her shoulder. Elevation is dialed for 600 meters, and a quartering crosswind hold in Mills waits at the edge of the reticle where habit keeps it ready. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks controls sectors and timing while the platoon feeds her clean windows. Short bursts hold attention on target reference points and suppress angles that could rake the roofline if she lingers too long. The first shooter sits on the east ridge, with only a slice of shoulder and cheek showing. Emily breathes to a natural pause, presses clean, and sees a precise impact that snaps the shape off the rock. A second profile shifts on the west outcrop, sliding to a new notch that would hide the next shot. She adds 0.1 mil, breaks the round before he settles, and watches heat shimmer where the body was a heartbeat ago. Machine gun fire claws from behind a damaged barrier around 750 meters. Dust lifting in rhythmic puffs. She sends the first round to the edge to kick, spall, and force movement, then rides the second into the gunner as he leans to clear or tap rack. Mid-ridge movement resolves into a spotter pair that keeps indirect fire alive with a binocular and a handheld controller. She takes the spotter first to cut the brain from the loop, then follows with the assistant while cadence stays tight and measured. Radio brevity rolls through the headset as simple markers. Shift fire TRP. 3 and hold sectors east carry in her ear without distraction, while Brooks holds the net clean. Between shots, she works exact handling, so safety stays in front of speed. Selector goes safe when practical. Eyes run a short scan through glass and naked eye, and the spotting scope sits where she can self-spot without lifting her profile. A controlled magazine change comes when the cadence gives room. She rolls the rifle slightly, seats the fresh magazine with a firm tug, runs a chamber check by feel, and settles back into the same natural point of aim. The last threat hides low on the eastern cut, where patience beats bravado. She mirrors his rhythm, waits through a brief gust that tugs the mirage, corrects 0.2 mil right, and sends a clean hit that ends the trickle of well-timed fire. Wind holds get rechecked as the hillside quiets and the flags lift and relax. Emily keeps the selector on safe, glasses the tree line, and lets the reticle breathe on empty ground long enough to prove it is truly empty. Below, the platoon peels to better cover as suppressive arcs fade in controlled steps. Lieutenant Brooks keeps pursuit inside the Bravo fence, while base security and the quick reaction force close distance through lockdown routes. The headset carries sparse notes that confirm lanes and status. Mark clear TRP-1 and no movement west sit like steady beacons while her eyes run the ridge a final time. She gives the magazine a last touch, then safes the rifle and locks the bolt to the rear. The glass holds the hillside for a long beat until even the dust drifts lose their story and the contact is finally done. The range exhales into a thin quiet that feels heavier than the fight. Around 8 minutes after lockdown, the quick reaction force rolls through controlled routes while base security clears sectors and marks safe lanes. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks holds the platoon inside the Bravo fence and runs accountability checks. Movements go from urgent to measured as radios settle into calm cadence. Emily Carter eases off the rifle with care, learned the hard way. Selector on safe. Finger straight. Bolt locked back. Magazine retained. And a last glass of the ridgeline to make sure the hills stay empty. She steps down from the rooftop and returns the MK-11 Mod 0 to Lieutenant Brooks like borrowed gear handed back in a storm. The exchange carries relief and the weight of what it means to give something back that mattered. Petty Officer First Class Jake Walker waits with a fresh bandage at the shoulder. The platoon absorbs what just happened without words that would make it smaller or louder than it is. In the quiet, the questions arrive in the way eyes move. How did you know those angles spreads through the group? My grandfather taught me, and Master Sergeant Robert Carter, and the manuals leave some things out, settle in the air, like facts. Not excuses. Why did you never tell us brushes the moment like a soft edge? When would I have, and you never asked land with a clean thud that no one tries to kick away? Range safety returns to control, and paperwork begins where adrenaline ends. Dust drifts down in slow sheets, and radios speak in normal voices again. Careful and plain. Respect finds its footing the way a boot tests a loose rock. No speeches. No celebration. Only the uneasy acknowledgement that competence forced the room to change shape. Administrative spaces on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado absorb the afternoon in muted steps and soft doors. Operations desks fill with folders, pens, and screens, while the air smells like paper and coffee that has cooled too long. The after-action report takes shape in clinical lines that carry more weight than style. It records an exemplary unsanctioned engagement in extremis, with dates, grid references, and a steady cadence of facts. 6 targets are listed as neutralized, with 1 controlled follow-up. Proper weapons handling is noted from selector positions to magazine retention, with a brief summary of elevation and wind holds used at distance. The timeline marks quick reaction force arrival near 8 minutes after lockdown. It explains how internal movement control created delays that were lawful and necessary under base security procedures. A hostile commercial drone appears in its own paragraph. Its removal is linked to a sharp degradation in indirect fire that helped shift the fight back toward containment. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks adds a recommendation that does not hide behind euphemism. He states that her actions saved the platoon and exposed a blind spot that policy did not anticipate. Senior leaders meet behind closed doors to read and argue in low, careful tones. Liability is placed against survival, exception against the hint of a system flaw, and policy against the way reality arrived without warning. Chain of command titles remain exact across every page. Emily Carter is identified as a civilian who acted under emergency authorization and within the limits directed by the platoon leader. The discomfort of the document lives in how plainly it speaks. Pride finds no easy sentence to hold, and the room lets silence carry the rest. In a ready room down the hall, a roster board waits for tomorrow. A call sign in pencil appears beside a line that once held no name. Just the simple word, ghost. 6 months later, the Naval Special Warfare Center moves through a calm training day that feels earned. Emily Carter works as a civilian contractor, subject matter expert, and adjunct instructor for advanced long-range marksmanship. Integrated by policy and grounded in safety and professionalism. Her classroom is plain and orderly, with targets stacked, wind charts pinned, and range flags visible through the glass. On the firing line, she teaches wind reading, density, altitude, awareness, natural point of aim, trigger control, and a deliberate follow-through that resists hurry. The battered notebook from Master Sergeant Robert Carter rests on her desk like a quiet anchor. Students from different units lean in as she turns lessons into habits and models the judgment to pass on marginal shots when conditions do not justify risk. The culture stays true to United States Navy training, where civilian instructors work beside cadre under clear roles. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks visits for a moment at the rail, staying in the background while the relay runs and letting respect speak without ceremony. Emily closes the block with a concise recap and a patient walk down the line. She stacks targets, notes trends, and moves with the calm authority of competence that has nothing to prove and everything to pass on. Class ends at Naval Special Warfare Center. Emily Carter stacks targets, wipes dust from her grandfather, Master Sergeant Robert Carter's notebook, and looks across a range that has gone still. This is the truth that carried her from that morning at Coronado. Titles can miss you, but competence does not. And sometimes it keeps people alive. If this feels true, take a quiet moment. Share it with someone who needs steadiness, and keep your own craft sharp for the day it is needed.